I don't think anybody should worry about that kind of stuff when they're like pre like that PMS stage. And really, you can probably get away with it for before you hit like $1 million in revenue annually. I think you can get away with just being good at one channel, right? It's not so much like it's difficult to go and do these things, but to be really good at maximizing a channel, you have to understand it at so many layers deep. Otherwise, it's just too superficial for you to perform very well, right? So if your hours are too divided among like 5 channels, you think, oh, I'm going to get a lot of spread. But it doesn't matter if you have like 50 views on 10 platforms. It's better to have like 500,000, 5 million views on one platform.
Welcome back to Horizons Podcast, where I convince marketing leaders to spill their secrets for the rest of us. Today, I'm excited to be sitting down with Sherry Jiang. Sherry is the founder and CEO of Peak, an AI-powered personal finance platform helping users track and grow their net worth. Previously at Google, Sherry left Google's Google Pay team in 2021 to build a startup. And she's been building a couple of startups since then and some side projects. I'm excited to dive in. To start with, you have written some interesting things, Sherry, about building companies outside Silicon Valley, why it's harder, but also sometimes more impactful.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's any one right answer to this. Like, it just really depends on who you are as a founder. But one of the reasons why I came to Southeast Asia and also wanted to build, start building in here is that I feel like there's a lot of talent accumulated and kind of, densely collected around Silicon Valley. But there are not enough people that like want to go out and work on other problems, right? And there's like billions of other people outside of the valley, right? So that's what I really like about people who want to not just like build a startup, but also think about how their impact is actually greater on the broader ecosystem here. So, one thing that, I've been doing right on the side is actually this whole like upskilling, like code with AI class. And part of it is actually really this community effort, because I feel like there's a lot of more people that may have resources or maybe friends they can talk to who are really plugged into the whole revolution around using AI coding tools like Cursor and V0 to code. But that hasn't really translated, I would say, as much to the ecosystem here outside of the developer ecosystem. So in that way, this is like me being like, here, what can I do to, help the ecosystem, right? And I'm really glad to say that at least one student that went to our class followed up with me afterwards. We were doing an ice bath, actually, funny enough. I just ran into him and he was like, you know what? I have quit my job in banking and I'm going to build a startup now. And I had the courage to do it because I decided I can actually build it on my own from the course you took. And that to me is like, one of the reasons why I do this. So yeah, I think it's just being beyond just yourself and seeing like what you can do to inspire or maybe like, give someone the courage to try to go build something.
That is incredible. And you come from a marketing background. You were the non-technical co-founder, if I understood correctly, in your company.
Yeah.
What was it like getting into using AI to code? How hard was that?
Very, very difficult in the beginning. And actually, it's really a mindset thing. It is unlike anything I've ever done in my life. Like, let me just be honest. Maybe the closest thing this was is a philosophy of logic class I took in university. Like, this is like when I was 18, where like, again, it was like really hard, like pressed you to like solve logic puzzles. I really think that this was the closest thing. And initially it was challenging, right? Now, good thing is I had the motivation and I had the use case. A lot of people, when they're like, I kind of want to learn how to code, but if they don't have like that pressing motivation or like that need, it's hard to really get started. But for me, I was like, I want to prototype stuff so I can get faster user feedback for my startup, but I cannot like keep waiting like, too long for my developer team to work on it because they have core stuff to work on, right? So for me, I was highly motivated and I had a use case. Like, can I build like these like, simple mini apps around personal finance and start testing them with users, right? So I had all of that. Now, in the beginning, of course, it was really hard. I think first one is you have to get used to like making mistakes and having bugs. Like people get extremely frustrated at first, and that's probably where most people give up. They run into, a few bugs and they take it really personally. And I did too. And I was like, you know what, like screw this, right? But I was like, you know what, like, let me just sit down and just like work through a problem, use GPT to explain stuff to me and just like brute force through it. And at some point you get used to that suck in a way, right? So I think once I got past it, it became a lot easier to like kind of accelerate my learning. But it's a really steep learning curve, but it's more of a battle with yourself and your own kind of frustrations. So luckily I had enough motivation to keep doing it. So like I was able to like, start feeling like competent in that skill.
That's interesting. I feel like I've had a fairly similar journey in AI coding. Also started off with some projects. It feels like this just doesn't work. Maybe the AI doesn't work. Maybe I am not
Yeah.
able to do the coding with the AI, but then thankfully pushed through and got to a point where it still is really annoying sometimes. And
Yeah.
sometimes I feel
Yeah.
like I'm fighting with the AI more than I'm working with the AI, but it can do a lot if you push through.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
would you say for someone who's a marketer, not technical background at all? What would be a good first project that isn't too overwhelming, but can give them a taste of success?
Yeah, well, I think this is true for anybody, but like pick a project that is a use case that you would want because you can resonate with it so much more. So I'd say like 90% of the projects that the students in the class pick are all like personal projects, right? So you see a lot of, it's really cute. We have some parents who are like, I want to create like an AI storybook generator. So you can like pick like, the learning or the moral of the story, the animal and like the setting. So there's a few things you can pick and like it generates like basically a storybook. And one of the projects even had like AI generated visuals that went along with it as well, which is I think pretty cool. And they did this all within like 4 or 5 hours, by the way. So it wasn't like weeks and weeks. Like this is like from like I have no idea how to code to like there's an AI storybook. But I think because that person's like I care about this, I want to like educate my kids to create stories, bedtime stories that are like fun and have a moral. Like they're very motivated. So I think for anybody, right, marketers and other folks, like pick something that like really means something to you that like solves your need as a user, because at least like when it comes to like crafting out like the specs, but also putting love into the product, because I think that's really important, like putting that love in that product, like that really comes through if it's something that you can resonate with.
And what would those 4 hours look like? Like what would be hour one, hour two, hour
Yeah.
three?
Yeah. So hour one is we dive straight into basically the coding part. Like we actually don't spend too much time on like prompt engineering because we're like, you know what, none of these will make sense until you like make a bunch of mistakes and realize you have to use examples and be clear and like that's tough, right? So we jump into using something called V0. So for those who aren't familiar with V0, it's a tool created by its company called Vercel, which does generative UI. And in layman's terms, it means you can write a whole bunch of English, like I want to create a copy of Google Finance, and it actually generates a UI on the spot, as well as allows you to see the code. So it's really cool because you can see what's happening really quickly and it just iterates, right? It really feels like I'm like talking to a computer and like the user interface just gets created. So we do that because it is the easiest way for people to start seeing some kind of like progress and feedback, because trust me, if you get someone to try to use like terminal and like an IDE, like which is cursor, they get really, really frustrated. And again, you don't want people to like get frustrated before they see some kind of reward. So that's why like, it almost from like a BSci or behavioral science perspective, we're like, let's give people like an easy win to make them feel like they can build something, even if it's like in the browser and not like a full functioning app. So that's hour one. And then like hour 2 to 3, we do introduction to cursor, which is like where serious coding happens, right? And what's cool is like, we tell everybody, this is not a no-code tool. This is not like Bubble. This is not like, something with some training wheels around it. Like serious devs use this, and we're going to teach you how to use something that has max flexibility and power, but it's going to be hard, right? And so we like walk through an example. We help people set up their projects, and the very first thing we want people to leave with on day one is like, okay, I've imported my project that I work from V0 into Cursor and it deploys in my local host, and that's it, right? We just want that to be like a completion. And then, so that's day one. And the next day, we do working sessions. So everybody works on their project for a couple of hours, and then the remaining is demos. So we spend a lot of time recapping information, doing one-on-one support during that time. And that's when, again, people learn, oh, I need to be more clear when I prompt, not just like, hey, this is not working. It's like, okay, like, what is the behavior? What is it doing? Why is it not good? And what do you want it to do? Like, you need to get down to that level of detail, and people start to get it when their code fails. So yeah, that's a very, very brief run through of like how the class actually works during those couple of hours.
Incredible. And I feel like this sort of thing is really important, whether you're in marketing or anything else. This is the cutting edge of where we're going next as a society. and
Yeah,
learning these skills is so helpful. So
for
anyone
sure.
listening, take the time to go check out Sherry's course and learn some of this with her course or elsewhere. And it's interesting to me how this onboarding is very similar to any onboarding we do as marketers. You want to have a reward early
Yeah.
enough. So you optimize the first hour, you see something, the second hour, you put in more work and you see another reward,
Yeah.
and so on. How do you think about jumping over to Peak, to your
Yeah.
finance company? How do you think about onboarding within a financial
Yeah.
ecosystem?
Yeah. I think it's absolutely the same thing. And honestly, it's been a challenge, I would say, for most personal finance apps in general, where the onboarding is so frictionful in a way because you often have to like connect a bunch of your accounts through like APIs. And if they work, great. But if they don't work, then you're like, a bit frustrated and you're like, okay, do I contact support, all that? So, and you can't really use the apps if you don't have your data in there. So that's like friction number one. And then friction number two is like, so many people will like, let's say they successfully see their data. They're like, okay, now what do I do with it? Like, I want to be better, but like, where do I start? Like, how do I like meaningfully look at my data? What are some, you know, behaviors, habits that lead to this data that I'm not aware of, right? And then how does that lead to action? And I would say pretty much every product in the market in personal finance lacks that piece, right? And so for Peak, that's exactly the problem that we're trying to solve. Now, on the onboarding side, when it comes to data, it's very, very hard to optimize for this. So the best thing that we do is we don't force people to have to use the API. It's like recommended, but we realize that with a mobile app, which is what we're launching soon, there's a lot of like, I guess, learned or comfortable behavior around scan and OCR, meaning scan a picture and then, we have AI
Yes.
basically structure that data. So we have a alternative where people can basically take a picture of their credit card bill or whatever, and then we can actually read that and populate that. So, we're again trying to like remove some of that friction there. And then the second part that we try to do to remove friction, again, it's going with the what are we giving in value that's easy and bite size, and like in almost like TikTok carousel fashion, we have these things that we call check-ins, which basically give you insights around what you are doing that you don't maybe are not aware of in like a story format where there's like some kind of hook, some kind of like progressive revelation of information, there's tension building, and then there's resolution, which is like, okay, this is what you can do. So I'll give you an example of like something that I'm trying to work on, which is like my food expense. Like the problem could be like, look, your spending is 2% higher than the national average, and this is the amount, right? And it's mostly because of two things. One, you are going to fine dining maybe once a week, and number two, your delivery is really high, right? And the cost per meal is like this much higher for delivery, which you do X, for 3-4 times a week, right? As an example. Now, this is okay, but if this is like if you prioritize convenience, but just letting you know that this accumulates to a couple $1,000s of extra spend a year, then those can compound, just so you're aware. If you want to explore alternatives of what you can do, just shifting 20% to cooking at home could yield this. Save this if you want. So we still tell a story, right? And we are like, people love stories, right? If you just have a bunch of dashboards and numbers and like people have to create that story, and it's so much cognitive energy, right? So that's a bet that we're having on any kind of productivity app, right? And that's something that, we kind of bring in when it comes to Peak.
That's incredible. And telling stories with data it's hard to do in any form, but it's
Yeah.
even harder to do when you don't know the quality of the data that's going to come in. If
Yeah.
someone just scans one PDF, you
Yeah.
might not have very much data at all to work with. How do you
Yeah.
handle a use case where like they just don't give you enough information to make a story?
Yeah. Well, I would say that we would go based on what people share. I would say by and large, people are kind of used to the idea of like adding like their credit card statement, at least in like, download and upload PDFs. I mean, to produce those insights that I just described, you really just need like a month's worth of data, right? To be able to see. I can't tell you like your trends over the last 3 months, but you can at least see within the month, like what are your habits week to week? What are the big buckets? What kind of habits lead to that, right? So again, we will enrich the insights if there's more historical trends, but there's actually enough with just 1 month. And then when it comes to like, let's say investment insights, I always I think that most people's portfolios are not actually extremely complicated to read. Like it's like probably a collection of like, your retirement accounts, your if you have RSUs or like stocks, like that's probably somewhere, but not everybody's a Googler or ex-Googler. And then they have like maybe one main brokerage, maybe two, and then like maybe like a crypto account. But again, there's not that many places for it. So generally speaking, I would say you would need to just connect like I say three places for most people. I'm unusual where I have way too much, but you don't have to generally have so many things that you put into Peak to get a picture around, let's say, investments.
And now a word from our sponsor. It's me. I'm actually not taking any sponsors in season 1, but I just wanted to say thank you for listening. It's been such a joy recording these episodes, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I have. If you would like to support the podcast, the single most impactful thing you can do is leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. This will help new people discover the podcast. And if you have someone in your life who's passionate about marketing, send this their way. They'll probably love diving into these insider tactics and stories. With that, back to the conversation. That makes sense. And zooming a little bit further back to why you started Peak, there's so many different personal finance apps that exist.
Yeah.
My personal experience living in Singapore is that a lot of them are very US centric and don't work so well outside the US.
Yeah.
What was your starting insight for Peak?
Yeah. Well, main big thing is like, I'm just really ADHD and bad at life admin. And I just wanted an app that like made me feel good using it. And I think that's like, again, very, very underinvested for most people in the building in the personal finance space. And I do feel like, because of my work at Google, it gave me a very different perspective on the whole space. Because one of the things that Google Pay focused a lot on, I'd say more than Paytm or the other competitors, was like, how does this app make people feel? Like we would sit down and literally be like, how does this make someone feel? Like, does this make them feel encouraged? Does it make them feel anxious? And I remember like, even like looking at Figma mockups, right, with my team, and we'll actually write these things down. Like, what do we think people feel, right? So I think that's that level of like empathy with that emotional state that I bring to Peak that is a little bit different than maybe some of the other apps out there that really come from more of like a finance background, right? They're almost like, okay, let's see what corporate B2B SaaS companies have been using and let's just consumerize it. And I just think that's actually the wrong approach. I almost think that you need to take a consumer app mindset and apply it to money, right? Just like you take a consumer app approach and apply it to fitness, right? What I study in the, in the space for inspiration for Peak is actually not other personal finance companies, but it's like fitness trackers, right? It's like lifestyle companies where like I can see how how products put together data and insights to encourage and drive behavior change that's positive for somebody.
That's amazing. So you're over 3 years into this journey so far with multiple pivots in between. When you go back to the beginning, how did you get your first 100 users?
Yeah, all of it was organic and actually all pretty much from LinkedIn. So I've been pretty active on LinkedIn for the last like 2 years, I would say. I'm very much like build in public. Like I post about, what we're learning, what we're building, prototypes, all that stuff. Like I just put it out there, right? And what's really cool is people really do reach out. They'll be like, hey, I saw your post and I really resonate with this. So I post again about like, I have ADHD and like, it's very helter-skelter and like all that stuff to like put my stuff together and, not be late on a bunch of stuff, right, for my finances, including things like taxes. And when I openly post about that like behavioral challenge, people reach out, like DM me and like, oh, yeah, my wife and I have ADHD and like we also resonate with this. And so, yeah, that's kind of like where I get a lot of the users where like I kind of describe my own problem, right? And then people like who find that to be relevant to them, they also reach out as well. And at a certain point, I couldn't take like hundreds of DMs anymore for people interested in beta testing. So I was like, okay, let's actually like create a wait list and have people like sign up and everything. We've had a few thousand people like sign up for the product for the beta. And out of that, we've had a consistent 100 of them, actually a little bit more than 100 now, but 100 consistent paying customers that have come back and said, okay, you know what? Like I am willing to pay for this product that is solving my need. And 100 users sounds like nothing when you're at Google, but as a founder, like that, it does literally everything. Because you're like, yeah, there's 100 people. I can't even fit 100 people in my condo, right? But there's 100 people that are like, you know what? I trust you. And I want to pay for this product, which means a lot.
And especially I feel in finance, that trust is
Yeah,
so important because I'm not just going to give my
absolutely.
finance data to anyone.
Yeah,
What were the sort of focus areas that were most important for you in those first few years?
yeah. So I think looking back, one of the most important things was actually just learning or just getting to know myself as a founder. Maybe people who start out, some of them are like way more self-aware than me. But when I started out, I thought so many different products and ideas and people to work with were interesting. Like I'm an ENFP, so I'm always like, I can see the possibilities and everything. And that's a great thing, but also not always a great thing, right? You got to edit. So I think in the beginning, like, I would say I didn't really know myself as well, right? I think I was like, maybe I want to build a platform business and I don't mind marketplace, or maybe like I don't mind B2B and like having like institutional customers and all of that. And throughout like, my 3+ years, I've learned to understand myself and like what burns me out, what excites me and all of that, because I really like the longevity of being a founder is not the money. It's not just about the money. It's actually your emotional runway. And if you keep working on stuff that is an emotional debit, like things you do not enjoy, like I do not like enterprise sales. I just don't feel like I feel like I'm like back in corporate. I just something about it that's, not my favorite thing. I also don't like marketplace businesses because I like to feel like I'm not having to pick like one side of the market and kind of push and sell to the other. Again, I'm a natural marketer. Like I like to magnetize and draw people. I don't like to like be as push in a way, right? Or doing things like where maybe I don't think it's best for the end customer, but I have to get an ecosystem going, right? So I learned so much about myself. And I think a lot of this came from journaling and like just trying to develop a internal understanding of myself. So I can stay in the game as long as I can and like keep enjoying doing it. So yeah, learning about who I am as a founder.
That is so important. I love the emotional runway. You might have money, but if you don't have the personal interest and the ability to focus on it, then
Yeah,
that runs out first.
I actually think that's like 90% of people, that is the case. Now, for some people, sure, I really agree. Like, look, money's a big thing, right? I don't disagree, but you see plenty of people who probably could have another shot financially, but they just won't do it because it's a trade-off, right? Your time is valuable and you hit a point where you're like, I just can't imagine waking up and, showing to the world that like, I'm so excited to work on this problem, right?
Yeah. As you look back at all of the things that you did over the last few years, are there 2 or 3 that you wouldn't recommend a first-time founder do again?
I think anything that requires like, again, this really depends, but I think anything that has high switching costs, I think that's a really hard one. And switching costs, by the way, doesn't just mean like factories or whatever, but ones where like it requires you to have a specific network, maybe with like regulators or banks or like certain things, right? Where like maybe like, you have like you need to have that relationship to make that business work. It's really, really challenging, right? I also think it can also apply to my first business that I worked on, which was actually in the crypto space, right? And I was doing a stable coin. Stable coin is basically a crypto version of a real world like currency. And it's really hard to do one because you need a lot of capital. You need a lot of capital to get that business started before you even know you have product market fit. And so my advice to first time founders is pick a area where like you don't have huge upfront fixed costs before you even know you have PMF. Like your job is hard enough as a founder. Do not add more things that are like really, really difficult as a founder. So that's my advice, right? Find something that like you feel like you like have an unfair advantage doing, or at least like you have a fair shot of doing, right? And don't try to be a hero and like do this thing that seems hard, or oh yeah, I could be the one that conquers that. Most of the time you aren't, right? It's really, really hard when you have cards stacked against you for certain types of products.
The idea of switching costs is quite powerful, and that focus on like how long does it take to try this before you know
Yeah,
if it works, and then switch to
yeah,
something else. Do
yeah,
the things that are shorter.
yeah,
I also want to go deeper on this product market fit piece.
yeah.
How do you assess the product market fit of Peak, or how have you assessed the product market fit of Peak?
Yeah. So I think there's different ways to do this. I'll tell you like what I did initially and like what I'm doing differently now. Initially, I was very like survey driven. I was like, you know what? Like I have found this method where there's a survey that you ask like how disappointed would you be if peak did not exist tomorrow? If 40% plus say that, then you are on your way. But if less people say that, then you have things to work on. And I was like religiously using this as a Bible because I was so uncomfortable with the idea of like how ambiguous PMF could be. And I think honestly, it was a bit misguided because our user base just was not big enough, I would say, to like really just take those results as seriously, right? Because I was like, oh yeah, like it's increasing. Like maybe we optimize for these couple of people that, we think we can move over to this bucket. And I think I was missing the bigger picture. I think this is possible. Again, people might disagree with me because Sean Ellis, who created this PMF test, probably says you can use it for everything. But now that I've gone through it, I feel like for consumer, that's a little bit more challenging, at least at the stage that we're at, right? I think at our stage, we know we're on the right path when there is actual virality of some sort. Like you just have to, where it's like, it's just taking off in some very unignorable way where like people are sharing it and you see like downloads just increasing like 100% week over week. Like you really have to have that as consumer. And sometimes it can be quite binary. Like you feel like you're trudging along for months and months and months without really much progress. And boom, some big person retweets you or like some trend takes off and then like it goes, right? And that's happened to like, a few startups I know, right? There's one company called Jenny AI that has done a really good job of using like TikTok strategies, right? And they were like stuck at like this same level of revenue that we have been. And they just found one creator and like one like user group, like college students, right? And then just like things just kind of clicked and kind of grew from there. So I think for a consumer, you don't have to overanalyze the data. Like you will just, it's like, I think like content market fit or like that virality point is like far more important. And then I think after you get past that, then start worrying about retention and maybe you can start running the test, right? The like survey and everything. But like, if you don't get to that point, it's absolutely not helpful at all. Like you cannot have we cannot have a user base of just 100 people in our beta program. We need that to be like, X, right? 100, 1,000X. And that's what we're working on, right? That's why we've been making all these changes this year to make the product more compelling and reach a larger audience.
And it's a good point too, that I think you sort of brought up, that sometimes something that's a very good assessment to measure is not a very good North Star measure. That maybe if you like assess your customers and see what percent say that they would be disappointed to lose me, that might be a good measure. But if you then try to see like, okay, what if I move these 5 people into the disappointed category? Suddenly you're optimizing for that number instead of like measuring where you're going.
Yeah. Besides like seeing the bigger picture, right? And like, I felt like it was like us optimizing on local maxima without understanding what the like global maxima was, right? And I think that can be really scary because again, or understanding the global maxima is just purely on gut because you do not have those users, right? And that's where like, being a founder is art and science, right? You kind of got to make those gut calls based on like some intuition and just roll with it.
For anyone who's not heard of this concept of local maxima and local minimum, can you just explain that? Because this is a brilliant way of thinking about things.
Yeah. So in like geometry or in like a math class or back in school, you had concepts of like, there'll be like this like 2 by, this chart, right? And you have like little humps like this, right? And so like a local maxima would be, okay, between like, let's say 0.1 and 0.10 here, this is your local maximum. This is the highest it gets. So if you're only looking at that place, you're like, that's the best it's going to get, right? That's what we should be optimizing for. But if you like expand it out, you're all of a sudden like, oh, there's a peak that's big, no pun intended. There's a peak that's bigger here. That's the global maxima, right? And when you are like trying to narrow what you're looking at, you might be missing that bigger picture. And I think that's really important as a founder because it's not always easy figuring out what the right scope of things should be. Because if you're always looking like too broadly, that your messaging, your product is just way too watered down. But if you're like here, then you're missing like the bigger picture. You're missing the bigger opportunity that like, if you don't get there, like you will just not be big enough as a business, right? Or, to be able to like, be like category defining in some kind of way.
And to your point on trusting your gut, it's very challenging to say, okay, we're at the top of a hill, but I think there's a mountain over there. Let's go into the valley and see if we can climb up that mountain. You really have to trust.
You just gotta trust. It's freaking scary, right? I'm trying to give a good example, but I remember, I'll like maybe give a personal example. It just really reminds me of like the first time I was able to catch a wave when I learned how to surf. This is like back when I lived in California. But like you do not know what you're doing out there. It is terrifying. Like there's like waves pummeling at you. You're like, I'm like trying not to drown and get like salt water in my eyes and my mouth. And like you're like, I tried popping up and get all that technique right on the shore, but like you just like it just all kind of goes away. And like at some point, like the waves coming at you, you just gotta go for it. You're like, I might completely just crash out and tumble in the water, but like I'm just gonna go for it. And it's like terrifying. And that's the feeling that I think you get as a startup founder. And initially that feeling in your amygdala or like that gut of like, oh my God, like I'm so terrified doing this. Like it's very, very strong. You feel all the time. And gradually you start to practice having that feeling where it just kind of goes away, where you're like, it's just another day, another like, I'm going to do something I have no clue how to do, but we're just going to send it, like you just kind of get used to that, like almost cavalier, like, like attitude of like, let's just go for it. Yeah.
That is a very important skill, and one I don't think I always have, but it's a good one to improve upon. I want to go deeper into this area of trusting your gut. So obviously we come from Google.
Yeah.
It's very data driven, but
Yeah.
sometimes when you're working with small numbers, you don't have a lot of
No.
data to go on.
Yeah.
How have you merged this like data and also intuition in your work at Peak?
Yeah. So by data, I often am referring to like empirical evidence within the product, but you can still find other data to like make your hypotheses better, right? And I'd still do a lot of that. So I'll give an example of like where I actually look for some of these insights. I spend so much time on platforms like Reddit and TikTok actually, because people are just so open to sharing like what they're thinking about money, especially Gen Z. Like I'm telling you, there are like people, creators who are like, this is how much money I make. Here's how much I put into this account. Here's what I'm worried about. And you see comments. Yeah, like I am too. And it's a treasure trove of like data, right? Again, this is not data for any product that exists, but like it's such good insight, at least on like what the problem statement is. Again, it's not any insight on the solution, because you never should trust users' insights on solutions until you have a product, but you get to learn so much. The great thing about Reddit is like I say Reddit is more like written long form than TikTok. And again, because it's anonymous, people will just like share everything. I mean, they will share like they will put down like how much they regret buying their house because now they're like stuck in a mortgage, they got laid off, and like here's what they're worrying about financially, and they're like talking to people about it. So I use a lot of this, right? And I'm chronically online looking at this stuff. So I feel like in a way it's like I'm like in tune with the ether, right? In tune with the meta of like what was happening here. But internally, I also keep training my gut, because training my gut by actually like reflecting on those same kind of questions with myself, right? So I also am like, all right, like how would I approach, or what am I worried about, right? What's something that I feel like I don't have enough visibility on, and like how do I feel now, and how would I feel if I were to solve this problem, right? And so I have this internal dialogue with myself, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm also kind of a user, right? So I use that to, I would say, like add a little bit more dimension to like my overall database of information. Yeah. So again, that's on data gathering, but you're like, okay, what if like you cap out on like all the data you can gather within yourself and on Reddit and on TikTok or whatever? It's really hard to explain intuition. It's just a feeling. It's just like if like someone were like, you only have 1 minute to decide on like what you think you should do based on like what you know, and it's incomplete, like what is it? And I just do it. Like it's just like gut feel. I cannot describe. It's like maybe the gut feel only comes because of like the amount of information you like channel through your head. And then the trust part comes from also like knowing that whatever I do pick, it's like it's an experiment that is pivotable as well. I'm like, look, this is what we decide for now. This is how long we're going to work upon this hypothesis. And if this is not correct, we will also then go and figure something else out, right? And literally even today, we sat down, went through some of the features in our app around the carousel, that story format I talked about around insights, and we like changed a bunch of stuff because I was like, this doesn't feel very useful to people, right? And I went back to the drawing board and spent time thinking like, okay, if I were objectively a user, like what would keep me like swiping, right? I hope that answers your question around like gut, but it's something you can train. You just have to like give yourself a lot of data points. Yeah.
And I love what you were saying about taking a bet that is something you can walk back in the future. This idea of thinking in bets is so fascinating to me. And you've been actually dabbling in poker for the last few years. Do
Yeah.
you feel
Yeah.
like that has informed how you make decisions in your
Yeah.
startup also?
Absolutely. I do think in bets. For those who like don't play a lot of poker, poker is basically a game of like risk-based decision making under uncertainty. And so many times, like you will make the quote unquote optimal decision based on the information you have and still lose a hand. And sometimes you might be like completely maniacal and like do something you, from a probability standpoint, shouldn't do, and you win. And you have to know the distinction because otherwise, like, you will eventually over the long term lose money if you think you're just good, even though it's luck, right? So that's one part of it. Now, how that's translated into my startup is I work on trying to understand where we lie on the spectrum, right? Like how much of this was within my control and I, had an oopsie and I need to course correct, and how much of this was like just unpredictable, right? And you give yourself so much peace of mind. Like when my first startup failed, a big part of the reason why it failed was the crypto market just melted because FTX, this big exchange, collapsed. I couldn't help the part that the entire crypto market like melted and we had no liquidity. But what I could help was the fact that I don't think we did good enough PMF testing. And I'm kind of glad that this sort of happened. So like it allowed me to like crash and burn the idea early on, right? But I couldn't blame myself for like all the like difficulty in getting things off the ground in the beginning when it was like market wide thing, right? So I think that's one of the things I learned with poker. The second one is actually bet sizing. Now, in poker, basically you have different betting rounds, and there's something called a pre-flop bet, which is like you have your two cards in your hand, and then you have like community cards, which are the ones in the middle, but you don't get to see that flop or those three cards in their pre-flop bet. So you have to like blind bet and be like, okay, like how good is the two cards I have right now? And if you have pocket aces, that's really, really good. If you have like 2-7 offsuit, that's like really not good. Most of the time you should fold those. But in a lot of situations, you might not have a lot of information. And, one example of this is actually like hiring. Like you have never worked with somebody before, but based on their background, you think that's enough to like basically hire them and, see how they work with you. Right. And then, and it's okay if it doesn't work out. And I think that's also the case for any experiments you run where you put a little bit into the bet. And then as it like proves itself more and more to you, you add more on. But you got to right size. Like you should never like go all in and do something crazy for something that is not proven yet, because you will quickly run out of resources. So it's a lot of this like bankroll resource management that happens in poker. That's also with your startup, with your time, with your money. Like how do you make all the bets to learn the most, to like give yourself the greatest chance of success?
How have you thought about that in how you've marketed Peak? So for instance, LinkedIn has been a big area for you. What was the initial bet? How did you know it was paying off?
Yeah, I mean, I think, initially our target audience that we were really looking at, which is now expanded, we were looking at like people who are slightly more fluent working professionals in like tech and finance careers. And like LinkedIn is amazing for targeting that audience. Like it's full of that. And also like organic personal brand content tends to do really well compared to like company content as well, because again, they want you to pay ads when it comes to company stuff. So there's a little bit of alpha for those who like want to use LinkedIn for marketing, use a personal brand. And I think it's kind of enough. I was like, what's there to lose? Like, so again, when it comes to cost, like I love writing. Like I've been writing to myself, like doing all that for like many, many years. So maybe for me, like the bet sizing to like try to do LinkedIn is a lot lower than like somebody who like hates doing a personal brand, right? So maybe for them, they're like, I don't see enough value to do it, so I'm not going to do it. And they just never put the pre-flop bet. But for me, I was like, this is like not that hard. Like I like writing, so whatever, right? And it's paid off. So, I start out by like doing like 2 posts a week, and then, okay, it resonates 3 posts a week. Then I did like 5 posts a week. Sometimes I was doing Sunday posts. At one point in time, I was doing a lot. And, you also then realize you can't do LinkedIn and TikTok every single day all the time as well. And that's something that also has changed. But yeah, I think that's how I thought about it with LinkedIn. I didn't really have much to lose, and like I had everything to gain, so it wasn't too difficult of a bet to like just go for.
I love that way of recognizing what is the downside. the concept of taking care of the downside, I find, is
Yeah.
just in life in general, not even just in marketing. It's really helpful because we don't think about downside as humans. It's why gambling does so well. But if you
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
think about the downside, as long as you take care of the downside, the upside will take care of itself.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I want to pivot in a slightly different direction, which is from thinking in bets, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
How does someone get started in content creation, personal brand building,
Yeah.
if they're not someone who already is good at writing and capable or enjoys writing about themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think it comes down to firstly like a understanding of like who you are and what you like to talk about, or where do you have like good stories and insights, right? And so that's one part. But then it's also like understanding like what other people might value seeing, because if you're just always writing for yourself, that's basically a diary and that's fine. But like you also need to not be just shouting into the void and like see what connects with people, because that's what communication is. It's connection, right? It's not just shouting at people. So I think figuring out what those are for you is probably key, right? And I think everybody has a different answer to this. And I think everybody has cool stories to write about. They just have to like dig deep enough. So let's say like you wanted to like start a LinkedIn brand as a modern day PMM, right? At a big company. So how do you get started? I mean, the easiest is just share your like differentiated stories on the topic, right? What did you work on and what were some like the cool, compelling nuggets? So like, for example, if I were to like maybe restart my LinkedIn and just talk about this, I'll probably talk about how like, hey, like how do you acquire millions of users by not spending any money, right? And that is like kind of like shocking. It's like everyone thinks you have to spend money, especially at Google. Like, how do you do it without spending money? And then, you write that story, right? Or, one that probably I would have written is like, hey, I worked on like markets that I'd never even lived or grew up in. Here's how I developed the ability to empathize, right? And again, it's like unique to me because it's my own story, but then, it's something that maybe other people relate to. So yeah, it's like coming up with like, again, that thing that you want to be known for, that you enjoy writing about, that you have good stories that like people also can derive some value from. And you just like start building there. I mean, if you're not able to produce more than one quality story a week, then just do one, right? I don't think you should do less than one. Then it's like kind of hard for the algo to pick up and that component still exists. But look, focus on like one good story a week and things just kind of happen.
I love both of those examples you came up with. I want to read both of those articles.
They
But I
don't
think,
exist, but yeah, like go on.
if only. But I think what's interesting for people who may not be as quick as you at thinking up really excellent headlines is using AI. I found that if I take something that's like, hey, I have this story, I have this thing I've written, and I put it into an AI
Yeah.
tool, I can tell it, give me, I love the word scroll stopping. Give me a
Mm-hmm.
scroll stopping headline or
Yeah.
10,
Yeah.
and then I pick the best one. And that can save a lot of time and add a lot of intelligence to what would otherwise not necessarily be as impactful from me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. And then another idea that people can use is think about like when they're consuming content, like what kind of person they want to emulate, right? Like what kind of do they want to do like Matt Levine, like you're very funny but you're a Bloomberg writer style? Do you want to do like you know there's this one person on YouTube called Cleo. She's like this like person who just talks about the nerdiest topics in like the most like friendly and enthusiastic way. Like, do you want that style? She's very warm. She's not very controversial, but she's like, very warm, right? Or do you want to be like polarizing, right? His name is like slipping my head. He does a lot of public rants. Anyways, name is slipping me. But again, more controversial, more polarizing, like wants you to feel a little bit of not sure how to, but like it makes you think, right? But pick like some styles that maybe you as a consumer like or resonate with and can see yourself like authentically representing that tone as well. Like again, don't do something that doesn't really fit you. And then you can feed that persona to AI and like have it try to generate some hooks. And of course, don't like just copy paste all the time. Like you probably want to adjust things yourself. After some time, like you start to develop a knack for it. It's just practice. Like you write like 100 hooks, you just become a hook factory, right? You just get used to that muscle in your brain.
Yeah, so much of that practice is essential. I am reading this really interesting book called Selling with Stories, or Stories That Sell. And one of the things he's talking about in the book is the importance of just sitting down every day and writing down your best 2 stories of the day. And they're going to be terrible, but a year in, they're going to be pretty good. And just getting those reps in.
Absolutely. One YouTuber I really like called Casey Neistat. He is like such a good filmmaker for someone who never went to film school, but he did this thing where he basically vlogged every day of his life and like just found a way to make it so cinematic. Like he would just like take the most mundane things and like would be able to tell a story. Like he was like, he lives in New York. He's like, okay, there's this fire escape over there. Oh, you know what? I remember a conversation with me and my buddy on that fire escape 10 years ago when we were such a different place in life. And you know what? I really want to call him up in life, call him up tonight and just catch up, right? It's like this like 10-year fire escape conversation, just like what's changed. We both have kids now. So like he just like creates stories out of the mundane. And I think like in a way it's like such a beautiful way to think about life because the mundane is mostly what we have in a way. And we bring so much meaning into those. And that's what kind of brings all this joy, this way to connect with people. So yeah.
That. And it's also interesting as we grow in our lifetimes, time tends to go faster.
Yeah,
but a lot of that is just because we're not noticing the details. If we take time to notice the details, it does slow down.
Yeah.
Before this fully turns into a philosophy podcast, which is wonderful, I want to go to retention, customer retention. You have run, if I'm not wrong, hundreds of WhatsApp conversations with your customers to do customer discovery and uncover these insights. What prompted that, and how do you approach this piece of your work?
Yeah, I would say like part of it was probably like extreme customer OCD, which is like, you know, in a way it's good, but I would say like, you know, in the beginning, I just didn't want any insight to be left unturned, right? I was like, I'm not letting like these learnings go without eyes on it. And so it was a bit obsessive where like I had basically WhatsApp chats with everybody and like talking to them all the time. And I think the great thing is like you kind of like have a lot of data points to work with when it comes to making like decisions around product. I'd say the downside is probably like your time, and also like sometimes you know, again, you might want to trust your gut more than maybe what someone tells you, right? And finding the balance between the two. So I think it was a really good exercise for me in the beginning to just see what that's like. Will I adopt that same approach? I think there's a threshold to it. So now I'm starting this, or I have this principle in my head of like 15 good users. Like maybe all you need is 15 good users who are on speed dial and you just talk to them. You do not need hundreds, right? It becomes like, so it's just 80-20 that stuff. So I think, again, I do really advise people to like have at least some users they know as well as their brothers and sisters. That's something a PM at Google actually said before. And I'm like, yeah, like you gotta know like what they're thinking, like the 15 minutes before they use your app, 15 minutes after they use your app, the week after they use your app, how are they feeling, right? And you can't have 100 best friends, right? You probably have a couple like close ones, so you get like your crew right on that. So that's more of my approach now. Is like let's have smaller but deeper kind of relationships with beta testers.
And how do you recruit those 15 people on your team, or like on this team of people you talk with?
I mean, I'm still in the process of thinking that through, but I would say you gotta start broad first and like, you know, get a few that you think will be core customers in, and just see like who engages, right? Who like cares enough about this product where like they are proactively bringing things up to you, not just you reaching out and asking them. But that's how you know someone cares, right? Because anytime someone sends a text message, says anything, it's a cost, right? It's a cost of your time and energy. So if they're like, hey, I saw this, or, you know, hey, maybe I had this thought that passed through my head today. Maybe that's useful. I love those things because people don't always share like thoughts. They'll share behavior, but they might not be like, yeah, I want to share that like this kind of confused me and you might want to take that into account, right? So you get more of those people that are very proactive in sharing like internal dialogue. So we don't have to do as much guesswork around like, okay, what do we think users' internal dialogue?
And this is something you've touched on a couple of times, that what people say isn't always like what they're thinking.
Yeah.
And it also isn't always when they say, here's the solution I need, that's not always the solution they actually really do need.
Yeah.
How do you translate from what people say to what you should actually go build?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I think partly I do look at who is telling me. And the funny thing is, there are some people who are very self-aware and very good at describing problems to people, right? And I'm not saying like all product managers are like great at this, but I say like a lot of people who are product managers are also very good at communicating like themselves as a user because they get it. Like they're like almost like specking out things. So like again, like some people who are like well trained on that thinking are just better at giving feedback, and that's fine. So I do like pay attention to what they say. But I would say like the other thing is just get a prototype in front of people to play around with as quick as possible. And like this again goes back to the first topic, which is like why I learned how to code with AI. Like just create something throwaway and like send it to them, right? And then see how they react to it. Are they even opening up the link that you send? Because sometimes they'll ask what's up, and if they don't open up or they don't respond to you right away, it's like, okay, well, I put in like a little bit of effort to realize it doesn't really matter to them. So you do have to find eventually some kind of like valid, behavioral validation versus just verbal, right? And if you can like, bet size it so it's like a very cheap experiment to get like some behavioral read, like go ahead and do it.
And how many prototypes would you be creating in like a normal month, let's say?
I mean, in the past two, it's been like one a month. Okay, if you count like the full app build, it's been three. Like there are some versions of like Peak, the mobile app, which is like super janky. I mean, it's like the colors are not brand colors, but I was like, I don't care. Like this doesn't really matter when I'm testing. And that I built like in like December, just like me, myself, and Cursor. Now the other prototypes we built are like, using a web browser to simulate what the mobile app looks like, right? Because mobile is a little bit of a different framework. So we use that to like internally test as well as share externally how people feel about the story format because it's again very different, right? So yeah, I mean there's no like hard and fast number of like you must have this number of prototypes a month, but it's more like okay, when you get to a point where you feel like cheaply testing something is the best point of validation, like can you build something?
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so pivoting from you're figuring out product market fit, you're trying to assess what customers want. Let's say you reach that place where you now have some amount of product market fit. What are your first steps as you start adding new marketing channels?
Yeah, I'm be very happy to get to that point. But I would say that then my work actually starts becoming a little bit more similar to like what like a PM I would probably do at Google, where you start to like look at channel optimization. I don't think anybody should worry about that kind of stuff when they're like pre like that PMS stage. And really, you can probably get away with it for before you hit like $1 million in revenue annually. I think you can get away with like just being good at one channel, right? And at some point you hit caps, right? Where you're like, okay, the energy spent is better for a new channel than like trying to like, go for this one that's giving diminishing marginal returns. And then you just like look where your audience is, right? Okay, if it's not TikTok, like are they on Reddit? Are they on these platforms? And do we have a strategy that allows us to talk about it in a similar way that we've done before, but tweak it slightly so the cost of us shifting positioning or whatever we need to do isn't as high. Then you pick a few of these and you test out like what's efficient, and you can base it off of like time spent, money spent, and then like what are the downloads and results that come from it. I mean, it becomes very much like performance marketing in a way. And I think that you do have to try a bunch of those things when you get past a certain point as a consumer product.
I think that's so important, that element of you don't need to actually start trying this until you get to a fairly high level in the company growth. Because it's easy to get distracted, try a million things, and not have the impact that you could have by just going deep on one.
Completely agreed. And again, it's not so much like it's difficult to go and do these things, but like to be really good at maximizing a channel, it's like you have to like understand it at so many layers deep, right? To make sure it's going well. Otherwise, it's just too superficial for you to like perform very well, right? So if your hours are too divided among like 5 channels, you think, oh, I'm going to get a lot of spread, but like you can't meaningfully come up with like a hook or a way to approach it that people care about. It doesn't matter if you have like, 50 views on 10 platforms. It's better to have like 500,000, 5 million views on one platform if you just do it well.
I've even noticed that just with this podcast that I'm starting, that there are certain places it's getting more traction. And when I spend time on other platforms, it's not necessarily nearly as helpful as if I were to just spend more time on the thing that is working. I'm going to pivot again. You mentioned earlier that building outside of Silicon Valley is so important because there are all these users who don't live in
Yeah.
Silicon Valley, and it's good to understand them. How have you approached localization within your product?
Yeah. So for, I would say peak one, before the mobile app we're building, we've, I would say mostly had to localize with the open banking integrations that we have in the app. So for those who don't know what open banking means or no idea what I'm saying, it's basically the ability to connect to like an app, third party app to connect to like your bank account, your credit cards, your investment accounts to give you like a full financial picture because most people don't have everything in one place, right? So you won't have that read. So we localized and spent a lot of effort on creating that for Singapore because it doesn't really exist in a meaningful way versus like outside or versus like in the States, right? So that's like one way we've localized a product from an infrastructure point of view. I would say there isn't as much localization on maybe the language of the app or like it's not like we have Singlish in the app or anything like that. I think it just really depends on what you do. Because we're a finance app, there's like a limitation of how playful you can be. I mean, we try to push the boundaries because we don't want to be boring, but it won't go like full colloquialisms or any of that. So I hope that answers your question. I do think localization is important, but you also have to think about which parts are important to you, right? For us, it was like the functioning of the app had to be localized to work versus like, making it like, very Singaporean in culture in some way.
What marketing channels do you think are currently underrated today?
I mean, I do think short form video is underrated, but it's underrated outside of the community. If you talk to anyone trying to build consumer apps today, they'll be like, we're trying to crack virality on TikTok. It's just like, it is like, it's just true. Like I don't know anyone else. Like I went viral on LinkedIn and, I have $1 million in revenue. Not a single one. I don't know anybody, right? In consumer. That's fine, right? Maybe Twitter, I think there's here and there. But so it's underrated from like a overall perspective, but I think it's very well understood within the community of consumer app builders that you like generally want to crack a strategy there. But I think one of the most underrated channels in general across the board is actually Reddit. Now, the problem with Reddit is it's a very hard platform to promote yourself because like they just don't want any of that in general. And when it does happen, you have to do it in such a nuanced way where like you're like just providing like so much value to the point where like, okay, like let's just hear what this person has to say. But I do feel like Reddit gets like it pops up for SEO so much for Google search. And I've also heard that LLM models will actually start being trained on Reddit as well because of just how like, again, authentic the content is because it's not a bunch of people trying to promote themselves, right? So if someone can figure out a good Reddit strategy, maybe you can actually get, bumped up in ranks, not just on search, but maybe on large language models as well. And I'm sharing this as like someone who's not done this yet because it's like, again, something that we would need to spend a lot of efforts on. But I generally think there is something there that is unexplored. You have to keep adapting your channels, but I think like being a good storyteller, right? That does not change, right? How you package the story, that's what changes as you, go from channel to channel.
So true. Speaking of things that do change, I wanted to think about AI for a minute and from a couple of different perspectives. First one being, how do you see AI changing the way that we manage our personal finances?
I mean, so much. I mean, even today, like, I still use ChatGPT for my own finances, right? Outside of my own product. It's just such a game changer. Number one is that it's like, so it can not only just do the analysis, but it can give you like great context and it's super fast as well. So I think that any of the stuff that you may have been like, oh my God, I need to go talk to a friend who like knows this stuff better, or like maybe I need to go research and do Excel and all that. So your workflows are really, really like segregated at this moment, but like AI makes it possible to like go to one place and like get all that stuff done. Right. And you can use it as a teacher. And that's one of the things that I like about coding with AI as well. Is like, not only am I just doing stuff, but like I'm creating like a feedback loop where I'm learning as I'm doing. And AI is very, very good at that. And it starts understanding you as a person with all your context as well, just like a human would. So in the future, if you like ask questions, it doesn't start from ground zero. It's like, hey, like a few months ago, like you mentioned that you're going to move to this country, like, has that happened? And maybe we can use that to like discuss what you need to plan for.
What are like one or two prompts that would be particularly powerful for someone who has not used this before?
Yeah. Just copy paste your credit card statement into GPT and just say, hey, this is my credit card statement. I would like you to help me figure out some insights. Focus on things that are not obvious and things that I may want to change as behavior. I mean, it's a very simple one. I don't think I like put it down anywhere. It's just like, what do I want out of it?
I think it's interesting to me how often in AI, the blocker is knowing what to ask, because the AI can do so much more than we might initially expect. So asking like, what are the non-obvious things that I should be learning about my credit card statement? If I don't know to ask that, I'll never get those insights. If I just say like, here's my credit card statement, what's happening? I might get a much worse response and then think AI is bad. But actually it's that I just didn't put a great prompt in and I can get much better results.
Yeah, for sure. And again, always like you can ask like what's non-obvious, like, because like obviously if I'm trying to ask these kind of questions, like specific questions, like I can kind of just do the analysis in Google Sheets, but the non-obvious stuff is interesting. And it'll point things out where like, oh, like maybe I wouldn't have done this analysis. I wouldn't know where to look. Again, it's like the local versus global maxim. All right, AI might be looking in a different place than you and tell you something that you didn't know about yourself.
And I was looking at a chart the other day, which who knows these charts that you find on the internet, if they're accurate or not. But it was showing that very low, like under 20% of people in most industries are using AI on a daily basis, which is kind of shocking to me since I do use it quite a bit and there's so much value in it. Just getting started, trying some things out. What do you think someone in a marketing role should try as a prompt or as a use case?
My gosh. I might not give specific prompts. So, I mean, use cases, like I really think you should use as a writing assistant. Like I think some people like give flack for like, oh, AI assisted writing or blah, blah, like, oh, like this is some grass-fed, organic, like straight from my brain writing. And I'm like, sure, that's fine. But like, if you're able to use something that like can take like your amorphous word vomit and like create something, like you just could pump out so much more stuff. Like that's just like reality, right? I don't speak Shakespeare straight from my brain maybe right away. Sometimes like it helps structure thoughts. So like you can use it for so many things. Just like think about like a campaign that you're working on, like just word vomit, or like go on a walk and like talk to AI, and like it can actually structure things out really well for you. And then you start to focus on like getting the ideas generated in your head and having AI like do the thing that it's good at, which is just putting some structure, it's an organization around it. I also think I've been using like myself a bit extreme, but I pay $200 a month for a GPT Pro because I just use it so much, but like it's so goated. It actually like searches like the entirety of the internet. It's basically like whoever was like maybe on SNO or like strategy and ops or like, some kind of research team, right? And you just like take what might have taken them 2 weeks to do, and GPT will take like 10 minutes to like generate like basically like McKinsey style report on like maybe where you're trying to work on. So I basically asked it like a question of like, hey, could you go through like all the like TikTok creators who build an AI or talk about AI? Like, here's some I did get some examples just so like, know somewhere where to look, and just give me like 200, categorize them. And like, that's something that like, I probably could ask 1,000, but like that would have taken a human a while. But like, you're like, yeah, you're basically able to do all that in such a short period of time. And if you think about it, like so much of marketing is still pattern recognition. It's still like, what do we think sticks with people? And like if you can have something that like can generate all those insights for you, why not use it?
And it's interesting to your point on people hesitate to use AI because they want the like straight from the brain stuff.
Yeah.
If you look at the human corollary, there's so many places where we wouldn't just use the thing straight from our brain. We'd have an editor who helps us to edit it. We'd have maybe even a ghostwriter in some cases who helps us to write more than we otherwise could. And AI just starts to fill in some of those roles more effectively than we ever could. Well, that brings us to our lightning round. And the idea with the lightning round is I'm going to throw out a few concepts. Feel free to just answer with your gut.
Okay.
Or you can go into more detail if you would like to. The first question, product-led or sales-led growth?
Ooh, I would say content-led growth.
Love it.
So neither. Yeah.
Community first or product first?
Community first.
Early access or waitlisting?
They kind of mean the same thing to me, but I'm going to go with early access because it sounds like you at least have people that are doing stuff. You can like have a wait list forever as like signal testing, but then never launch anything, which is not nice.
And you sort of did both, right? You did early access and then got so much early access, it became a wait list.
Yeah, exactly.
Regional focus or global focus?
I think you have to be regional in some way from day one. I think a lot of people like conflate US with global. Like, oh, you launch in the US is global. Like, no, it's not. The world has 8 billion people. US has 300 billion. So you are regional. Sorry, right? But it's
100%.
fine to have global ambitions, but I think you got to start somewhere, geographically confined.
Website or social media?
Social media, 100%. Yeah.
Email marketing? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, my website is just a way for people to find, like, it's like a front door, but like everything else like leads you to the front door. The door just has to exist for the website.
Which I find this particular analogy quite funny. There's the old one that says, like, if you build a perfect mousetrap, people will beat a path to your door. I don't know if you've heard that story before.
Yeah, I think I get what it's saying. Like, it's like you build they'll just come. Now that the problem is there were just not as many people building good mousetraps, right? But now like everyone can build a mousetrap, so you got to compete with a lot of mousetraps. So you got to lead people to it. Yeah.
I feel like it's completely false, at least now. Maybe it was true at some point.
Like, think about it. Like, if you're the only blacksmith in town, like, you don't need to do any marketing. Like, people just go to you. Like, you're the blacksmith. Like, there was no blacksmith. Now there's one. Like, you need some stuff. If there's 10 blacksmiths, I'm like, it's not going to just sell itself. You got to go out there and like, story tell like why you're better. It's just how it works.
Email marketing or push notifications?
Push notifications.
Organic social or paid social?
Organic social.
Content marketing or event marketing?
Content marketing.
Well, that brings us to the conclusion of the interview. Where can people go to learn more about you and about Peak?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. It was Sherry Jiang. But if you want to see more unhinged content, you can go to Twitter. Very off the cuff stuff I share there. I'm Sherry Jiang. That's my Twitter handle. And if you would like to learn more about Peak, or it's like, what is it about, all of that, you can follow us on TikTok. My handle is just Peak Life Sherry. You can see some fun memes that we tie to personal finance. We just really try to have fun.
Fantastic. Well, all of that will be in the show notes or below if you're on YouTube. And thank you, Sherry. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.